have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Good evening and welcome to a special edition of RFL. I'm Richard French and thanks so much for joining us this Wednesday evening, August 28th. Well, tonight we focus our entire program on the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. 50 years ago to the day, more than 200,000 Americans, they gathered in Washington to call for change. It was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. But as many remember today, it was the day of Dr. King's dream. Well, that day has since gone down in history as a pivotal moment in America's story. So tonight, we not only pay tribute and we ask the hard questions and take stock of how far we've come and how far we as a nation still have to go. And for the next 60 minutes, we will take a closer look here at race in America, starting with today's commemoration. Did President Obama's address as the first black president mean the dream has been achieved, or is it a symbol and yet an incomplete dream at that? And then we talk about the state of the dream. What would Dr. Martin Luther King's march for today, what was it about, what has it achieved, and what has yet to be done? And then the challenges that remain for the black community. High rates of incarceration, unemployment, out-of-wedlock births, what can be done to more fully complete that dream, and some tough questions within the black community themselves. And then later, the politics of race, with Trayvon Martin's tragedy just behind us and the efforts to squash voting rights just ahead of us. How does race still play a role in today's political arena? And finally, the speech itself. As we do every year here, we will take you beyond the dream and you will hear for yourself much of what Dr. Martin Luther King had to say in those immortal words 50 years ago to the day. The state of the dream, it begins now.
We have come a great distance in this country in the 50 years, but we still have a great distance to go before we fulfill the dream of Martin Luther King Jr. Too many of us still believe our differences define us instead of the divine spark that runs through all of human creation. I said to each one of us today, we must never ever give up. We must never ever give in. We must keep the faith and keep our eyes on the prize.
It's highly unlikely that any of us three over on my right would have served in the White House or be on this platform had it not been for Martin Luther King Jr. and his movement and his crusade for civil rights. Perhaps the most challenging statement of Martin Luther King Jr. was, and I quote, "The crucial question of our time is how to overcome oppression and violence."
And I would respectfully suggest that Martin Luther King did not live and die to hear his heirs whine about political gridlock. It is time to stop complaining and put our shoulders against the stubborn gates holding the American people back. But a great democracy does not make it harder to vote than to buy an assault weapon.
We often talked about sometimes we must take positions that are neither safe nor popular nor politic, but we must take those positions because our conscience tells us they're right. We've got a lot of work to do, but none of us should be any ways tired. Why? Because we've come much too far from where we started. You see, no one ever told any of us that our roads would be easy.
We may never duplicate the swelling crowds and dazzling procession of that day so long ago. No one can match King's brilliance, but the same flame that lit the heart of all who are willing to take a first step for justice, I know that flame remains. That tireless teacher who gets to class early and stays late and dips into her own pocket to buy supplies because she believes that every child is her charge. She's marching. That successful businessman who doesn't have to but pays his workers a fair wage and then offers a shot to a man, maybe an ex-con, who's down on his luck. He's marching. The mother who pours her love into her daughter so that she grows up with the confidence to walk through the same doors as anybody's son. She's marching. And that's the lesson of our past. That's the promise of tomorrow. That in the face of impossible odds, people who love their country can change it. And when millions of Americans of every race and every region, every faith and every station can join together in a spirit of brotherhood, then those mountains will be made low, and those rough places will be made plain, and those crooked places, they straighten out towards grace, and we will vindicate the faith of those who sacrifice so much and live up to the true meaning of our creed as one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And of course, the speeches today, and we'll hear the speech that really was the impetus for today. 50 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King's infamous speech. That will be coming up at the bottom end of the program. All right, let's bring in our panel on this now. Richard St. Paul, Republican strategist, former vice chair for the National Black Republican Association. Dominic Carter, of course, political journalist and author. Reverend Dr. Adolphus Lacey, pastor of the Mount Olive Baptist Church in Peekskill, New York, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. Gentlemen, thank you all very much. We're going to break this thing into parts, and we've changed our format, so we're having really 3 different conversations, and then we remember the day of the address and then the speech itself. Let's first do with the president and the speeches today. Stakes obviously high and expectations equal to that. What do you think of what the president and the other voices had to say today, Richard?
I think it's excellent. As we just saw a clip from the president who said, we're carrying on the dream. People who are making a difference in their loved ones' lives, like a mother and a daughter, or a father and a son, or just the parents, or someone who is helping in the community, they're marching. And I think that is the important message, that we all have a little Dr. King in us to continue the dream, to make a difference, that we all have that power. And I think that was a very good point from the president.
For the president, Dominic, I mean, he had said apparently to advisors close to, don't expect the dream part 2 here. Nobody could measure up to that standard that Dr. King delivered. But nonetheless, the stakes were high for him, and expectations were as well. Mixed response. Everyone thought the words were well thought, well delivered, but yet some people expected maybe more. Maybe it was unfair expectations, but they were there nonetheless.
Unfair expectations. I really believe this president, given as the first black president, when it comes to race, topics of race, I really believe that his advisors intentionally tell him to tone it down. They don't want him going out there too far, because he's really not supposed to be the black president. He's the American president who happens to be African American.
You're right, but I had heard a growing sentiment before today. He's tried that for 5 years, and every time he's tried to be the post-racial president or whatever, the other side will still marginalize him. Right, take chances at every turn.
But he's going to stay that way. No, it's not at some point. He can never be the angry black man. I've said this consistently. This president has to stay steady. That's the way he has to lead.
How do you think he did today?
Well, he did okay. The remarks were pretty good. All of us, all Americans, stand on someone else's shoulders. And think about this for a second. If there's anyone that has benefited more from Dr. King's dream, so it's kind of an unfair expectation, it is the first black president of America. He could never match Dr. King. I don't think that was his goal.
Yeah, and you can't live your dream through the president, especially with the state of the black man and the black economy. I mean, incarcerations.
We're going to get into that one in a little bit. I'm not trying to cut that off.
I just want to say,
these are the conversations. Leave it to Richard. Within 3 minutes already hijacked the rundown. All right. Andrew, though, there were some who said this is a moment to lay out an agenda of sorts. Now, not just to commemorate the date here, but to say, I mean, if you remember what the original address of Dr. King was, it was about jobs and opportunity. And that certainly was involved in what the president had to say, but for people who are hoping to hear a mandate or a call to action, or this will be on the desk of Congress next when they return, it didn't happen.
Well, it's a tough needle to thread for the president, both in terms of speaking in overall generalities, but then pushing specific legislation. He hinted at some of his legislative pushes that will be coming in the fall without harping on them too much, and I think that would have been inappropriate today. It's also difficult, you know, no matter how much the president says, I'm not trying to do the dream too, it's natural to compare his speech to Dr. King's and to compare his speech to speeches that we've heard him give in the past. And those are very high bars for him to clear. I thought the speech was a good speech. I didn't think there was a lot of crowd noise. It happened in the afternoon, so a lot of people might have been watching with one eye and one ear.
The crowds were smaller for obvious reasons. The middle of a Wednesday in the summer. I mean, they had larger crowds for the weekend without the high wattage.
But I think history will
speakers
view this speech kindly. He may have been playing for history as opposed to playing for today.
You know, one of the speeches, Reverend, that I heard that struck with me was from Congressman Lewis, who was the only person who spoke today who spoke at the original.
That's correct.
With the original rally. And he said, for all of those who say that nothing's changed, he said, walk a mile in my shoes. When we tried to come down here, we were beaten. We were detained. We couldn't sit in different parts of us. We couldn't eat in certain restaurants. And I'm sitting here as a member of Congress, and we're going to hear from the first black president. Things have changed.
Absolutely.
To that end, the state of Dr. King's dream, 50 years ago then and to today, how do you think he'd assess it, and what do you think the assessment should be?
Well, by that standard, it's a success, but we then open it up to others. But the point in looking at John Lewis, and first of all, when we look at certainly, and I admire Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, but there were, I mean, to borrow the words from Malcolm X, the Big Six. So there were a whole bunch of speakers, and John Lewis was one of those. In fact, as John Lewis was prepared to give his speech, Dr. King thought that it was about a little bit too radical, and they were prepared to play music in the event that, you know, it got too radical.
Like a rendition of God Bless America, you know, they were going to pipe in the
absolutely.
sound. Yep.
So the part, and that's the part that I love, radical always changes given a context. And so history always looks, history is the best judge instead of right now. And when you look at where we were in 1963 to where we are right now, yes, changes have been made. But when you look at where we are now in 2013, do more changes need to be made? The answer is unequivocally yes.
And just as a little format question, you're going to see at the bottom of your screen comments today to our question about assessing the state of the dream. Just like I heard from Reverend and our panel here, we're asking this question of you at home. So please join us via social media with Twitter and Facebook. And I'll ask you guys the same question. Where is the state of the dream right now? You have symbols. We'll get into the math and some of the tough numbers. But still, nonetheless, a lot has changed. It's impossible to read minds, but do you think Dr. King would say, wow, I never could envision just 50 years later, Jim Crow has given us the first president? Would he be disappointed about still so many of the shortfalls, especially facing the black community?
Richard, I think that Dr. King would be very pleased from a political representation point of view, an African-American president, an African-American attorney general. Who could have ever predicted? And that's a tribute to all of us, all Americans, not just black Americans, all Americans, you know, African-American secretaries of state and so on. But I think Dr. King would also have, and we're going to talk about this in the next segment, a self-check moment for the black community. I think Dr. King would say, it's time to look in the mirror and be real with yourself.
50 years ago, Dr. King had a march. Speech was about jobs and freedom. The freedom has come. The jobs have not. There are still many jobs, disparities among African Americans compared to whites. When you look at the African American unemployment rate is double that of unemployment, somewhere up around 14%. When you look at African American youth between the age of 18 and 24, you're talking upwards of 40% unemployment. So where are the jobs? Where are the jobs for under an administration, the Obama administration, the first black president? What impact is he going to have
because Richard can't
in
help
black
himself,
America?
Because he can't help himself.
Absolutely.
That is the perfect segue to our next segment. Thank you, Richard. Step on lead.
No problem, Richard.
Segue. Killing me. All right, when we come back, the challenges, as Richard said here, that remain for the black community. In all seriousness, we're talking about real issues here. The high rates, as he mentioned, of incarceration, unemployment here, as well as the social issues attached as well here. That's all part of this dream as well. We're going to continue our special conversation here on this issue. And again, we welcome you into our conversation as well. Please join us. More of our program here right after this quick commercial break.